Finally, there's a podcast for podcasters. My name is Kyle Cummings.
And I'm Mickenzie, Vought. And each week, we are going to share the knowledge and expertise that we've gained from years of launching, running, and promoting successful podcasts.
Whether you're an aspiring podcaster or you've already got hundreds of episodes under your belt, these conversations dive deep into the topics that matter to every podcaster.
From marketing and growing your podcast to recording equipment and best practices, monetization, cutting-edge tools, hiring help, and so much more. All right, Kyle, how did we get here?
So a little bit of my background is that I was a record producer in Nashville for close to a decade, which I loved. And somewhere along the way, a friend of mine reached out and said, "Hey, do you edit podcasts?" And I said, "I don't, but I can." I mean, I work with audio.
The skills.
I do have the skills. I live in a program called Pro Tools, which is a music production, editing, mixing. Like I'm in there all the time. So let's just try this out. So I kind of just did that on the side for a long time, starting in 2016. It was about that time that Kristen and I, my wife, started thinking, and this podcast thing is kind of interesting. I could do it from anywhere. And how cool would it be to travel and just work remotely? And so obviously this is like pre-pandemic. That's more popular now. But we just kind of planted this seed of, man, that'd be kind of cool. But I was still very much invested in producing records. I would build a studio a few years later. We would have our son a few years later. And so we kind of put it on the back burner. And then somewhere around 2020, this pandemic came along and my wife was very much at work place that was not very work from home friendly. And she was really sensing a shift away from doing that and was considering either working for someone else that was fully remote or starting her own thing. And during the pandemic, the music industry more or less kind of shut down as well. So I experienced this weird thing where my music business was decreasing and everyone decided they wanted to start a podcast. And so the podcast
Everyone and their brother started a podcast.
Right. And I'd say the podcast business probably doubled that year between 2020 and 2021. Wow. And we kind of started revisiting that conversation of, well, what if we just sold our house? Because at the time, the market was very friendly to that. So what if we sell the house and hit the road? And what if my wife quits her job? And so that's ultimately what we ended up doing. In 2021, we sold the house. We stored all of our stuff except what we could fit in our SUV. We made the crazy leap. And so October 1st, we pulled out of our Nashville home, sold my studio, which I had lovingly and painstakingly designed and had built, and basically just put all of that on hold and said, I don't know when we're going to return to this. I don't know if we'll return to this. We don't know what's next. We just know that we're going on the road. And I had this podcast business that I was really enjoying building. That was going super well, was onboarding clients, was bringing on new team members, expanding services, thinking of better ways that we could serve clients. And the rest is kind of history. We've traveled to all four corners of the U.S., Vancouver and Montreal in Canada. We've been to Mexico. We're planning to head overseas to Europe later this year. And
so fun.
I know, it's been really, really wild. But somewhere along the way, I met you, Mickenzie, when we started working with the Living Centered podcast, which you produce and co-host. And that's kind of how we met. And I just saw your brilliance and expertise in action really on a weekly basis as we've worked together on your podcast. So tell the folks a little bit about your background in that.
Yeah, I have loved watching you grow Podcircle in the last 2 years that I've been working with you and knowing you even before, just knowing through Kristen and saying, hey, would your husband be willing to help us figure out how to edit this podcast we're starting? Because I was one of the literal million podcasts that launched between 2020 and 2021 for the organization that I work for. And so we launched the Living Centered podcast in January of 2021. And it was just kind of a dream come true for me. I have been a part of promoting and making podcasts for most of my career. Every organization that I've been in have kind of either I've been promoting it or being behind the scenes and helping it. Kind of worked in the social media space for a long time. And so being a client of Podcircle and a big fan of Kyle, when you asked me to do this, I said yes. An opportunity to nerd out on the things that I love and to talk about what we're seeing in the podcast space. I just could not turn down the opportunity. And I also just want to pour back into someone who wants to start a podcast and feels the intimidation that comes with that, because I read something a few weeks ago that said every podcaster you love once Googled how to start a podcast. And so I am just excited to be a resource because I know that you have so much brilliance, Kyle, and I have experience on the end of promoting it, on the parts of how to launch and produce and sustain from a content perspective. And so I'm excited to have the technical and the content meet together.
I know when I thought about starting the podcast, and I've wanted to for years, start a podcast for podcasters. When I thought of it, I was like, man, I think Mickenzie would be a perfect match because I'm in the post-production world, the editing, audio, video editing, creating, social media content to market podcasts, but you are so brilliant really on the front end of things with the strategy, creating the content, and then just your marketing mind as well. I don't know. I kind of feel like we're going to provide a ton of value to listeners.
Yeah, awesome.
And, we've already mentioned from not just providing content on how to market and grow podcasts, but we're really going to get into things like who we think the best podcast host platforms are. Because I've used probably a half a dozen now. And there are better ones than others.
Good ones and bad ones.
Yeah, totally. I mean, some of them are built for the future and some aren't. And so we're going to get into all of it and hopefully provide a lot of value to the listeners and a lot of guidance. And I'm really excited about that.
And have some fun along the way. I hope that this is practical and fun is kind of my hope for it. So.
Right on. Well, I'm honored to partner with you in this, Mickenzie. We're excited to be here. We're going to be doing this weekly, so stay tuned for the Podcircle Podcast.